I've seen, some of the interviews you've done about your relationship with Colin Kaepernick, and as many people know, I mean, obviously, just about everyone who follows sports knows about his anthem protests and kneeling while he was in the NFL. But maybe some people don't know that you actually spoke with him when he first started doing that, and when he first started protesting racism and police brutality during the anthem. He initially started out by sitting on the bench rather than kneeling, and you were the one who recommended that he kneel instead of sit if he didn't want to stand. But I'm curious, how did you get in touch with him, in the first place? And what has it been like, getting to know him and kind of see his journey, with his protests of racism and police brutality?
I mean, he actually reached out to me. He actually got in touch with me. I had written an open letter through the Army Times, which is a very small publication when you think of a lot of these bigger outlets. During the first couple of times he'd sat on the bench, and of course we were in the middle of a highly contentious election. This was 2016, so it was the Donald Trump versus Hillary Clinton time frame, and we're already pretty divided as a country. At least it felt that way, and there was a lot of uneasiness around a conversation of the flag and the anthem and those symbols that represent our country. And then of course the sort of the Black Lives Matter movement and the conversations around police brutality and these law enforcement officers not being held accountable for their actions. And it was a very highly debated conversation. And then Colin starts sitting on the bench in protest of that, and people saw that as, oh, he's protesting the country, he's protesting the anthem, he's protesting the flag. And it's like, that's not what he's doing. He's picking that time because it is a highly contended not highly contended, what am I trying to say? It's a controversial time to do something like that. It's an uncomfortable time to do something like that, but it's also an uncomfortable conversation to have generally. And he said he didn't feel comfortable standing for the flag of a country that oppresses Black people and people of color. And for me, I don't necessarily think that's what the flag's intent is, of course, and I don't think that's what the country was necessarily doing as a whole. But I absolutely also believe that we live in a place where you have the freedom, those freedoms of speech and expression that he was exercising. And also, if you really do love this country, if you're very patriotic, like, you should always want it to do better. You should want it to whether that's the military or law enforcement, first responders, government, all of those pieces. Like, we always want them to do better. The VA system, from a personal experience, of course, you want to see that do better. So, like, if the intent behind what you're doing and saying is for us to improve and to grow and to be better, then I don't really see a problem with that. And so I wrote this open letter kind of explaining my experiences, but also how, to me, those symbols mean something very different because of my experience. The flag and the anthem are something we hold very sacred in the military. And, when somebody is killed overseas, a folded flag is, given to the family member, and their casket is draped in the American flag. And when I hear the national anthem, I swell with pride because of what it means to me from my background. But that doesn't mean that everybody is supposed to feel those things, and that Colin doesn't have a very different relationship with those symbols. And so I wrote that letter. He ended up reading it. He was inspired by it, and he reached out to me and wanted to meet. And so we ended up sitting down the next day in San Diego. They were playing the Chargers in the final preseason game, and he was starting that night. At that point, he was a backup quarterback. but he was going to be starting because it was the last preseason game, so they were, the starters weren't playing, and it was military appreciation night, and like all these things sort of swirling around this controversy, and he's saying that he's going to sit again. And we had this conversation about, our backgrounds, why he's doing what he was doing. He wanted to hear about my experience in the military, and he wanted me to know that, he wasn't protesting people in the military. He has a lot of respect for those that serve our country. And at the end of the conversation, he asked me if there was another way I thought he could protest that wouldn't offend people in the military. And I told him, no, there's nothing you can do that's not going to offend some people. But, if you're not willing to stand, I think, if you're willing to be alongside your teammates, at least that's a big step, instead of kind of sitting on the bench, isolated, kind of away from the group. And he agreed that was a good idea. And the only thing that kind of made sense to me was if he took a knee. I mean, if he was committed to not standing, which he was. And so I suggested maybe you should kneel. People take a knee to pray and propose to their future spouse. And it's kind of a respectful gesture, I think, while also showing that you don't feel like standing. You don't feel like that those symbols are representing the country the way they're supposed to be. And he agreed it was better. It was more powerful. And so he took a knee that night, and I stood next to him, and that's where the kneeling sort of came from.
I really feel as though, regardless of what you think of Kaepernick, he's very misunderstood. And some people have tried to say that, his protests are just simply involve not respecting the country and not respecting the military. And, obviously, like I said, his protests started because of, how he felt about some of the racism and police brutality in this country, but also, based on his conversation with you and based on some of the things you told him, he felt as though kneeling would be, less offensive to people who have served than sitting, like you said. So, he did make an effort to continue doing what he was doing, but do it in a way that, someone like you who had served thought wouldn't be as offensive. So I think there's this false narrative that some people have about him as far as him being un-American or hating the troops, or some of the, wild accusations that people have thrown at him. So again, like I said, I feel as though he's very misunderstood, but, and I know this is a big question, but why do you think he is so misunderstood? And also, why do you think so many people are so incredibly divided about how they feel about his form of protest? And why is it such an incredibly polarizing issue?
Well, I mean, that platform he chose to take, he knew it was going to be polarizing and all that. That's why he did that. I mean, he wanted to disrupt. That was his intent. That's what a protest is. That's the intent of a protest. It's not meant to be comfortable. It's meant to be inconvenient. So. And I don't really want to speak on, why he's misunderstood. That's kind of, he has a platform and a microphone. He can speak about whatever he wants to speak about whenever he wants to, really. And for a long time, he chose to remain silent. Now it is different. With he's got a Netflix series, and there's a lot of things he's sort of more involved in from a public persona situation. But it's a tough one. It's just like, it's the times that we live in. It is a very controversial subject, and depending on what sort of quote unquote side you're on, or how you feel about it. There's a lot of people, when you look, it depends on, if you look at data, it depends on who's giving you that information, or who's collecting that data, and how they're sort of digesting it. Because, pure numbers wise, it's just, like I said, it's so complicated. It depends on who you're talking to. But uh, at the end of the day, like it's created a lot of change and a lot of, I mean, I think what's created more change and all that was George Floyd. But if Colin Kaepernick didn't start doing what he was doing, it probably wouldn't have as large of an effect as it did when that happened. So it's not really an easy answer to that, but that's just the times we live in, man. People like to fight. People are competitive in this country, you know, and so the unfortunate part is that often that comes without people being willing to listen to one another. And, you know, Colin's not perfect either. He's said things and done things that maybe he regrets at some point. Who knows? And not everything that he says I agree with, for sure. And there's, you know, it's just there's so much nuance with that. It's a really tough question to answer. But yeah, I mean, he's his own person. He makes his own choices, and you know, I also think that he is misunderstood to an extent because of the way that he represents himself, because it's very different in person, at least from my experience, than what you see on TV. You know what I mean? It's just very different, and I think he feels that he has to represent himself in a certain way, or the message isn't going to get across. You know, and he's got a lot of people in his ear, and you know, I'm sure a ton of people trying to hijack his message in some way, and so that's a tough one, man. But I sort of leave that to him. I don't want to pretend to know what he feels and what his intentions are behind everything he does, you know?